Lieutenant Hana Kim checked her weapon one last time as the transport ship shook through the atmosphere of Kepler 442b. The jungle world looked peaceful from space, but 3 human colonies had gone silent in the past month. No distress signals, and no trace of the colonists anywhere. Command wanted answers, and Hana's team was the best they had for this kind of work. Corporal Minho Park sat across from her, cleaning his demolition gear with steady hands. The man could blow up a building or defuse a bomb with equal skill. His calm face showed no worry about the mission ahead. Next to him, Sergeant Jiwon Lee organized her medical supplies in neat rows. She had saved more lives than anyone could. Count and Hana trusted her completely. Private Taemin Cho worked on the communications equipment in the corner. The young soldier could hack any system or contact anyone across the galaxy when needed. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, warning them about strange energy readings from the surface. Hana told her team to prepare for anything, but none of them expected what happened next. A brilliant flash of light filled the cabin, followed by alarms screaming throughout the ship. The transport lurched sideways and began spinning out of control. Through the small window, Hana watched the jungle rushing up to meet them at terrible speed. She grabbed her emergency pack and shouted for everyone to brace for impact, but the world exploded into chaos before anyone could respond. Metal screamed against stone and trees as the ship tore itself apart across the forest floor. Hana felt something heavy slam into her head, and then darkness took everything away. When consciousness returned, the first thing she noticed was the smell. Rich earth and strange flowers mixed with something else she could not identify. Her head pounded with each heartbeat, and warm blood trickled down her face from a cut above her left eye. The transport lay scattered in pieces around a small clearing, with smoke rising from the main engine section. Hana called out for her team, but only silence answered back. She found Minho's pack torn open with explosives scattered everywhere, but no sign of the man himself. Jiwon's medical supplies were smeared across a fallen tree trunk still dripping with something that looked like blood. Taemin's communication gear lay crushed under a piece of twisted metal that would take 3 people to lift. Her own equipment had survived better than expected. The plasma rifle still worked, and she had enough ammunition for maybe 2 fights, if she was careful. Her survival kit contained water purification tablets and emergency rations for 5 days. The scanner showed multiple life signs moving through the jungle around her, but none matched human readings. Whatever lived on this world was big, and there were many of them. The sun was already setting when she finished checking the crash site for survivors. Orange light filtered through the thick canopy above, creating strange shadows that seemed to move when she was not looking directly at them. The temperature dropped quickly once darkness began to fall, and she realized spending the night in the open would be dangerous for many reasons. She found a small cave formed by fallen trees and large rocks about 50 meters from the main wreckage. It would provide some protection from whatever was out there and hide her body heat from scanning equipment. After setting up a basic perimeter alarm using pieces from Taemin's gear, she settled in to wait for morning and plan her next move. Sleep came in short periods, broken by strange sounds from the jungle around her. Something large moved through the trees overhead, making branches creak and sway without any wind to cause it. Other noises seemed to come from the ground itself, as if huge creatures were digging tunnels beneath her feet. Once she heard what sounded like voices speaking in a language she had never encountered before, but when she looked outside, the clearing appeared empty. During one of these brief moments of wakefulness, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh scratches marked the trees around her hiding place in patterns that looked almost like symbols or writing. They had not been there when she first arrived, and she was certain no natural animal could have made such precise marks. Something intelligent was watching her and had been doing so since she crashed. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was not just a rescue mission anymore, and these were not random animal attacks on the colonies. Something was hunting humans deliberately and with purpose. The colonists had not simply vanished or died in accidents. They had been taken by something that could think and plan and kill with precision. When morning finally arrived, she emerged from her shelter to find more evidence of nocturnal visitors. Footprints in the soft earth around her cave showed something with claws had circled her position multiple times during the night. The prints were larger than human feet, but showed signs of intelligence in how they avoided making noise on dry leaves and broken branches. Her scanner picked up movement in the tree line about 200 meters away, but when she looked through her rifle scope, nothing was visible. Whatever was out there knew how to hide, and it was good at the job. She packed her gear and began moving toward what her navigation system indicated was the nearest colony site, hoping to find answers or at least other survivors. The jungle seemed to close in around her as she walked. Vines hung down like reaching. Fingers and strange insects buzzed past her face, leaving trails of luminescent dust in the air. Every shadow could hide a threat, and every sound might be the last warning she would get before something attacked. Her training kept her alert and moving, but she could feel eyes watching her from somewhere in the green maze surrounding her path. After 3 hours of careful movement, she found the first colony, or what was left of it. Buildings stood intact, but empty of all human life. Tables were still set for meals that had never been finished. Children's toys lay scattered in yards where grass was beginning to grow tall from lack of care. No signs of struggle or violence anywhere, but every single person had simply vanished without trace. She was examining the communications center when she heard it, a sound like breathing, but too deep and too slow to be human. It came from somewhere behind her, but when she spun around with her weapon ready, nothing was there. Only empty buildings and waving grass in the afternoon breeze. But now she knew for certain that she was being followed and studied by something that remained just out of sight. The game had begun, though she did not yet understand the rules. Something was hunting her with intelligence and patience far beyond any normal predator. It could have killed her already if that was its only goal, but instead it chose to watch and wait and test her reactions. She was not just prey in this deadly game, but also a puzzle to be solved by something that thought in ways no human could fully understand. Night was coming again, and she would need shelter and a plan. The empty colony offered buildings for protection, but also too many places for something to hide and ambush her. Better to keep moving and find defensible ground where she could see what was coming. The hunt was just beginning, and she intended to survive long enough to learn what had happened to the missing colonists and why. Dawn brought no comfort to Hannah as she emerged from her second night of restless sleep. The abandoned colony felt wrong in ways she could not explain, and the feeling grew stronger with each passing hour. She had chosen to shelter in the school, building where small desks and colorful drawings still covered the walls. Children had lived here once and played in these rooms before something took them away forever. Her scanner showed movement patterns that made no sense. Life signs appeared and vanished like ghosts, moving through walls and disappearing into empty air. Whatever was tracking her possessed technology far beyond anything in human databases. It could mask its presence almost perfectly, but occasionally, something slipped through the electronic camouflage to remind her she was not alone. The first body appeared as she searched the residential area for clues about what had happened to the colonists. Mignot lay propped against a storage shed with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes closed as if sleeping peacefully. No wounds were visible on his body, but something had arranged him with care and obvious respect. His equipment was gone, but his personal items remained untouched, including a small photo of his family back on Earth. 50 meters away, she found Taemin in similar condition. The young soldier sat beneath a tree with his hands folded in his lap, and his face turned toward the morning sun. Like Minho, he showed no signs of violence or struggle. Whatever had killed them had done so quickly, and without causing pain or fear. Their bodies had been placed with dignity rather than simply discarded like ordinary prey. This discovery changed everything in her understanding of the situation. Animals killed for food or territory, but they did not arrange corpses in peaceful poses or show respect for the dead. Only intelligent beings understood concepts like honor and dignity. Something was hunting humans not just for survival, but according to rules and customs that guided its behavior. She spent an hour examining both bodies and the surrounding area for evidence of how they had died. No poison showed in their blood, and no marks appeared on their skin. Their faces held expressions of surprise but not terror or pain. Whatever had ended their lives had struck too quickly for fear or suffering to register in their final moments. The footprints around both locations told a story of careful stalking and perfect patience. Her unseen hunter had followed Minho and Taemin for hours, learning their habits and movement patterns before choosing the exact moment and place to strike. It possessed skills that would make human special forces soldiers look like amateurs in comparison. As she prepared to leave the colony area, her scanner detected another presence moving parallel to her course about 300 meters away. This time, when she looked through her rifle scope, she caught a glimpse of something that should not exist. A shape that seemed to bend light around itself moved between two buildings for just a moment before vanishing again. It was tall and moved, with fluid grace that spoke of perfect physical conditioning and absolute confidence. The psychological pressure began building as she traveled deeper into the jungle beyond the colony. Branches snapped behind her with precise timing designed to keep her constantly alert and on edge. Strange scents drifted through the air, carrying messages she could not understand but which triggered instinctive responses of fear and caution. Her hunter was playing with her mind as much as testing her physical abilities. By midday, exhaustion was taking its toll despite her training and conditioning. The constant state of alertness required to stay alive was draining her energy reserves, faster than she could replace them with food and rest. Her mysterious stalker seemed to understand this and was deliberately wearing her down through sustained psychological pressure, rather than direct attack. She reached a narrow ravine carved by water through solid rock sometime in the early afternoon. The path ahead wound between high stone walls that would provide perfect cover for an ambush. Every instinct screamed warnings about entering such an obvious trap, but her navigation system showed this route as the fastest way to reach the second colony where answers might wait. The attack came exactly where she expected it, but not in the way she anticipated. Instead of violence or weapons, she heard the sound of breathing again, but much closer this time. Something large was moving through the rocks above her position with impossible stealth. Only her enhanced hearing picked up the faint whisper of air passing through what must be massive lungs. She stopped walking and stood perfectly still in the center of the narrow passage. Behind her lay open ground where she might have a chance to fight or run. Ahead waited unknown dangers in terrain that favored her hunter over herself. Above her, something waited with patience that spoke of absolute confidence in its own superiority. The moment had arrived for the deadly dance to begin in earnest. No more games or testing or psychological warfare. Whatever was hunting her had finished its evaluation and was ready to discover if she was worthy prey or just another weak human to be collected and displayed. Her next words would determine whether she lived or died in this place. She spoke without turning around or raising her weapon. Her voice carried clearly through the stone walls of the ravine and echoed back from surfaces that had heard no human speech for months. The words came from some deep place in her mind where survival instincts older than civilization still lived and guided behavior in moments of absolute danger. "I'll give you 3 more steps before I turn around and end this dance," she said. Silence, stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours. Then came the sound she had been waiting for. 1 step forward with claws clicking against stone. A pause as her stalker processed this unexpected response from prey that should have been running, in terror by now. Another step closer with more confidence as curiosity overcame caution. A 3rd step that brought whatever was hunting her within range of her weapon, and close enough for the final confrontation to begin. She spun around with her plasma rifle already aimed and fired in one smooth motion that combined years of training, with reflexes sharpened by days of constant danger. The energy bolt streaked through air that shimmered with heat distortion and struck something that screamed in surprise and pain before vanishing behind a boulder. First blood belonged to her, but the real fight was just beginning. She had wounded whatever was hunting her, but she had also announced that she was not helpless prey waiting to be taken. The rules of their deadly game had changed in that instant, and both hunter and hunted now understood they faced a worthy opponent. Green, fluid that might have been blood, marked the stone where her shot had found its target. The liquid glowed faintly and gave off a scent like burning metal mixed with exotic spices. Her scanner showed energy readings unlike anything in human databases, but the readings were moving away from her position at high speed. Whatever she had, Shot was hurt but not critically wounded. It would be back soon with a better understanding of human weapons and reflexes. The testing phase was over, and the real hunt would begin with both sides knowing the other possessed skills and intelligence, worthy of respect. She had proven herself dangerous enough to take seriously, and her stalker would respond accordingly. She moved quickly from the ravine, seeking ground where she could see attacks coming and respond effectively. Behind her, something roared with a voice that held notes no human throat could produce. The sound spoke of pain and anger, but also of appreciation for an opponent who could draw blood from a creature that had never known defeat. The game continued, but now both players understood the stakes and the skill of their opponent. Mutual. Respect had been established through violence, and both sides knew the dance would end with only one survivor standing when the music finally stopped playing in this jungle arena. 3 days passed in a deadly dance that pushed both hunter and hunted to their absolute limits. Hana moved through the jungle like a ghost herself now, understanding that survival meant thinking like her stalker and anticipating its moves before they happened. She had wounded the creature, but it had adapted quickly to human tactics and weapons, making each encounter more dangerous than the last. Her ammunition ran dangerously low after the second day of running battles. The plasma rifle held only 6 shots remaining, and she had used most of her grenades in a desperate ambush that had failed when her target proved too fast and too smart to fall for simple traps. Whatever was hunting her learned from every mistake and adjusted its behavior accordingly, making the same trick useless twice. Sleep became impossible except in short periods when exhaustion forced her body to shut down despite the danger. Even then, she woke every few minutes to check her perimeter and listen for sounds that did not belong in the natural symphony of jungle life. Her stalker seemed to need no rest at all, and maintained constant pressure that wore away at her physical and mental reserves. On the morning of the 4th day, she discovered something that changed her understanding of the situation completely. Hidden beneath fallen logs and carefully camouflaged with local vegetation, she found the remains of other humans who had fought and died in this place. Their equipment showed signs of hard use and desperate battles, but their bodies had been treated with the same respect shown to Minho and Taemin. Personal items from the dead colonists were arranged in neat displays near each body. Family photos, and jewelry and small mementos from home-created shrines that spoke of honor given to fallen warriors, rather than simple prey. Someone or something had taken time to learn about these people, and remember them as individuals rather than anonymous victims. She recognized some faces from the colony records she had studied before the mission. Dr. Sunmi Yang, the xenobiologist, who had volunteered for the first settlement expedition. Engineer Hyun-woo Kang, who had designed the water purification systems that made colony life possible. Teacher Soo-jin Park, who had educated the children and organized community events that brought families together. Each person had fought bravely before dying, and their positions showed they had given good accounts of themselves in their final battles. Weapons lay nearby with energy cells drained from continuous use. Improvised bombs and traps marked places where desperate humans had tried everything possible to survive just one more day in an impossible situation. The discovery filled her with respect for these ordinary people who had faced death with courage when something beyond their understanding came hunting. They had not been soldiers or special forces operators trained for combat situations. They were farmers and teachers and engineers who had found warrior hearts when faced with extinction and fought like heroes until their strength failed. That afternoon, her stalker changed tactics again and began leaving gifts for her to find. The first was a canteen filled with clean water that appeared beside a stream where she had stopped to rest. The container was made from some unknown metal that kept the contents cool and fresh despite the jungle heat. No human technology could have produced such perfect temperature control. Later, she found medical supplies waiting beneath a shelter made from woven branches and broad leaves. The medicines were clearly alien in origin, but her scanner identified them as healing compounds that would help with her various cuts and bruises. Someone was taking care of her physical condition while continuing to hunt her with lethal intent. A weapon appeared on the 5th day, crafted from local materials with skill that bordered on artistry. The blade was sharp enough to cut through metal and balanced perfectly for her height and arm length. Decorative patterns carved into the handle showed attention to beauty as well as function. This was not just a tool, but a work of art created specifically for her use. She began to understand that she was not just being hunted, but also being honored in some way that her human mind struggled to comprehend. The gifts spoke of respect for a worthy opponent and appreciation for courage shown in the face of certain death. Her stalker was not trying to kill her quickly anymore, but testing how long she could maintain her warrior spirit under impossible pressure. The realization came gradually that her unknown opponent was not human, but possessed concepts of honor and dignity that transcended species boundaries. It understood warfare as more than simple violence and saw battle as a form of communication between warriors who respected each other despite being enemies. Every fight was also a conversation about strength and courage and the will to continue when hope was gone. She began leaving her own gifts in return when she found safe moments to do so. Small pieces of human technology like energy cells and scanning equipment showed her opponent how human tools worked and what capabilities they possessed. In exchange, she found alien devices that taught her about technologies beyond human understanding and materials that could not exist according to human science. The gifts became a form of trade between enemies who were learning to see each other as something more than simple predator and prey. Each exchange built understanding and respect even as they continued trying to kill each other in increasingly complex and dangerous encounters that tested every skill both possessed. During a running battle through a crystalline cave system, she finally got her first clear look at what had been hunting her for nearly a week. It stood 9 feet tall with muscle that moved like liquid steel beneath skin that shifted color to match its surroundings. Claws that could tear through metal extended from fingers that also showed the delicacy needed for the precise work she had seen in its gifts and the arrangement of bodies. The creature moved with grace that made human martial artists look clumsy by comparison. Every step was placed with perfect balance and maximum efficiency. Its face held intelligence that spoke of a mind as sharp as its claws and far more dangerous to underestimate. This was not some simple beast but a thinking being with culture and traditions that guided its behavior, even in mortal combat. She managed to wound it again during their cave encounter, but paid for the success with injuries that would have killed a weaker person. Razor-sharp crystal formations had sliced through her clothing and skin when she dove for cover, leaving wounds that bled freely despite her attempts at field medicine. Her alien opponent had been hurt worse but showed no signs of slowing down or losing interest in their deadly game. When she crawled from the cave hours later, she found medical supplies waiting for her, along with food that her scanner identified as safe for human consumption. Someone who had been trying to kill her just minutes before was now ensuring she survived to continue their battle. The contradiction made no sense until she began thinking about honor codes that valued worthy opponents above easy victories. That night, as she treated her wounds with alien medicine that worked better than anything human science had produced, she finally understood what was happening to her. She was not being hunted like an animal, but being tested like a potential warrior in some culture that measured worth through combat rather than words or peaceful actions. The question was whether she would pass the test or die trying like the brave colonists whose bodies marked the places where they had made their final stands. Her stalker was not just evaluating her survival skills, but her character under pressure, and her willingness to continue fighting when victory seemed impossible to achieve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new tests of her resolve. She had proven she could wound her opponent and survive its attacks, but the real trial was yet to come. Somewhere in the jungle, a wounded warrior was planning the next phase of their dance, and she would need every skill and every ounce of courage she possessed to meet whatever came next. The morning of the 7th day brought revelation through technology rather than violence. Hana found a small device waiting for her outside the cave, where she had spent another restless night, listening to sounds that spoke of movement and preparation in the darkness around her shelter. The object was roughly the size of her palm and covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she was not looking directly at them. When she touched the device, it activated with a soft humming sound and projected images into the air above its surface. The pictures told a story that began with a world of crystal spires and floating cities, where tall, graceful beings lived in harmony with nature and technology. She recognized her stalker among the figures that moved through scenes of beauty and peace that spoke of a civilization far more advanced than anything humans had achieved. The images changed, showing the same world under attack by creatures that made her blood run cold, just looking at their projected forms. Things that were part machine and part flesh moved like a plague across the beautiful planet, consuming everything they touched and turning it into more of themselves. The tall, graceful beings fought bravely, but their weapons were designed for precise strikes against individual enemies, not the endless waves of consumption that swept across their home. She watched the destruction of an entire civilization in minutes of recorded history compressed into moments of horror that showed how quickly beauty could become nightmare when the wrong enemy appeared. The survivors fled in ships that carried only small fragments of their population toward stars that might offer safety from the consuming darkness that had taken everything they loved. The device showed her star maps and navigation data that revealed the truth about what had been happening to human colonies across this sector of space. The tall beings called themselves something her human mind could not pronounce, but which translated roughly as those who walk between stars. They were refugees from a war that had been raging across the galaxy for centuries against enemies they called simply the Devourers. Her stalkers stepped into view while she was still processing the information from the device. Up close, she could see details that her brief glimpses during combat had not revealed. Scars marked its skin where battles had left permanent reminders of conflicts fought across multiple worlds. Its eyes held intelligence and sadness that spoke of losses beyond human understanding. It spoke in a voice like distant thunder, using words that the translation device converted into human language with mechanical precision. Its name was Kethvar, and it was a hunter of the Starwalker military caste whose duty was to find allies worthy of joining their war against extinction. Every human it had tested over the past months had been evaluated according to warrior codes that determined whether an entire species deserved to survive what was coming. The missing colonists had not been murdered but recruited after proving themselves in trials similar to what Hana had endured. Those who fought with honor but died in the testing were given the respect due to brave warriors who fell in battle. Those who survived and showed the qualities needed for the greater war were taken to ships hidden beyond the edge of the system, where they learned to fight alongside beings from a dozen different worlds. Dr. Sunmi Yang had been among the first to understand what was being offered, and had volunteered to serve as a liaison between species. Her scientific mind had grasped the scope of the threat facing all biological life in the galaxy, and the desperate need for allies who could think and fight in ways different from the Starwalker traditions. Humans offered tactical flexibility and adaptability that could complement alien strengths. Kethvar explained that the Devourers were not truly alive in any sense that biological creatures could understand. They were a form of mechanical plague that converted organic matter into more of themselves, while using the memories and knowledge of their victims to become more efficient at the task of consumption. Every world they took made them stronger and harder to defeat. The Starwalkers and their few allies had been fighting a losing battle for 3 centuries, watching species after species fall to the expanding tide of mechanical death. Humanity represented fresh hope in the form of minds that thought about warfare in completely different ways than any other race they had encountered. Human creativity and stubborn refusal to accept defeat offered possibilities that might change the course of a war that seemed lost. But first, humans had to prove they were worthy of the knowledge and weapons needed to fight enemies that could adapt to any conventional attack within hours of encountering it. The trials conducted by hunters like Kethvar determined whether a species possessed the warrior spirit needed for battles that might last centuries without any guarantee of victory or survival. Hana realized that her performance over the past week had been broadcast to Starwalker commanders throughout the sector as an example of human potential in combat situations. Her refusal to surrender or break under pressure had impressed beings who measured worth through actions rather than words. The wounds she had inflicted on Kethvar were badges of honor that proved humans could hurt enemies who had never known defeat. The conversation was interrupted by alarms from sensors that Kethvar carried on his equipment harness. Something was approaching the planet from deep space, and the energy signatures matched those of Devourer scout ships. The real enemy had arrived, drawn by signals from the crashed human transport, and the weapons fire from their running battle over the past week. Kethvar moved with sudden urgency that told her their time for talking was over. The test had become real combat against opponents that showed no honor and took no prisoners. Everything that lived on this world would be consumed, unless they could stop the scout ship before it could signal for reinforcements that would bring overwhelming numbers within days. She followed him through the jungle toward the crash site where her dead transport still smoldered in its clearing. He explained that Jiwan was still alive, and being held there as bait for the trap that would determine the final outcome of humanity's testing. The Devourers needed living specimens to understand how human minds worked and would try to capture, rather than kill her medical officer if possible. The clearing had been transformed into a battlefield during their absence. Strange machines moved, between the wreckage of her transport extending tendrils that penetrated metal and flesh with equal ease. She watched in horror as the devices began rebuilding her ship into something that served devourer purposes rather than human needs. Ji-won hung suspended in a web of mechanical filaments that kept her alive, while slowly analyzing her brain patterns and biological functions. Her eyes were open and aware, but her body could not respond to her will anymore. She was becoming a source of information about human capabilities and weaknesses that would make future conquests easier for enemies who learned from every victory. Kethvar handed her weapons that he had taken from the bodies of human warriors who had earned them through courage in previous battles. The plasma rifle was more advanced than anything in human arsenals, and the blade was forged from materials that could cut through devourer armor when wielded by someone with the skill and strength to use it properly. Together they planned an attack that would either free Ji-won and destroy the scout ship, or die in the attempt. There would be no retreat and no mercy from enemies that existed only to consume and convert everything they encountered. The test had become a matter of survival, not just for the three of them, but for every human being who would ever live. The final battle would determine whether humanity joined the desperate alliance against extinction, or became another species fed to the mechanical plague that had already consumed countless worlds across the galaxy. Everything depended on two warriors from different species fighting as one against enemies that had never been defeated by conventional tactics. Hana checked her weapons and prepared for combat that would either prove her worth as a warrior or end her life in service to a cause greater than any individual survival. Beside her, Kethvar made similar preparations while speaking words in his own language that sounded like prayers or oaths sworn before gods of war and honor. The dance was ending, but the greater symphony of galactic warfare was just beginning for humans who had proven themselves worthy of joining battles that would determine the fate of all biological life in the universe. The attack began at dawn when the Devourer machines were least active, and their sensors showed reduced efficiency in the changing light conditions. Hana and Kethvar moved through the undergrowth like shadows approaching their enemy from two directions that would divide attention and create opportunities for decisive strikes against targets that never showed mercy or took prisoners. The first machine fell to her new plasma rifle before it could react to her presence. The weapon discharged energy that tore through armor designed to resist conventional human weapons and left nothing but scattered components where a moment before deadly technology had been analyzing her friend's biological functions. Ji-won remained suspended in the mechanical web, but her eyes tracked movement showing that awareness survived despite her paralyzed condition. Kethvar struck three machines simultaneously using weapons that moved faster than human eyes could follow. His blades passed through Devourer technology like it was made from paper, while his other hand fired energy bursts that disrupted the mechanical coordination that made the enemy so dangerous in large numbers. For the first time since arriving, she saw what a true Starwalker warrior could accomplish when fighting without restraint. But their initial success brought immediate response from systems that had been hidden throughout the forest around the crash site. The ground erupted as larger machines emerged from concealed positions where they had been waiting for exactly this kind of assault. These were not simple scout units, but war machines designed to handle multiple opponents using coordinated tactics that adapted to enemy behavior within seconds. The battle became a desperate running fight through terrain that offered little cover from weapons that could track targets through solid matter and around obstacles that would stop human technology completely. Hana found herself relying on instincts developed during her week of being hunted, while her alien ally used skills refined over centuries of warfare against the same enemy. They moved like partners in a deadly dance, coordinating attacks and defensive maneuvers without need for spoken communication. When she drew enemy fire, Kethvar struck from angles that enemies could not defend. When mechanical warriors focused on the more dangerous Starwalker threat, she eliminated support systems that kept their primary weapons functioning at full capacity. The tide turned when they reached the area where Ji-won was being held and discovered that the machines had been using her as more than just bait for their trap. Her medical knowledge was being downloaded and analyzed to understand human biology well enough to create bioweapons specifically designed to target human physiology. The process was nearly complete and would soon provide enemies with tools to exterminate her species efficiently. Kethvar roared with rage that spoke of personal offense at such dishonorable tactics. In Starwalker culture, warriors fought other warriors, but civilians and non-combatants were protected according to codes that had governed warfare for thousands of years. Using captured medical personnel to develop weapons of mass destruction violated every principle that gave meaning to honorable combat. His fury transformed him into something beyond what Hana had thought possible for any living being to achieve. He moved through enemy positions like a force of nature, destroying everything that stood between him and the machines that were torturing an unarmed healer. Mechanical warriors that had seemed unstoppable moments before fell like wheat before his blade, while their weapons failed to track movement that transcended normal physical limitations. She used the distraction to reach Jiwon and began cutting through the filaments that held her friend prisoner. The web was more complex than it appeared, and some of the connections went directly into nerve centers where severing them incorrectly could cause permanent damage or death. Her hands shook as she worked, knowing that one mistake would kill the person she was trying to save. Jiwon's eyes focused on her face and her lips moved, trying to form words that paralyzed vocal cords could not speak. Hana read the message in her friend's expression and understood that the medical officer was telling her to ignore personal safety and focus on stopping the bioweapon project, even if it meant letting her die in the web of mechanical torture devices. But abandoning a wounded comrade violated every principle that had made her worthy of Starwalker respect in the first place. She continued working to free Jiwon, while Kethvar fought against overwhelming numbers of enemies that seemed to emerge from every shadow and hiding place in the jungle around their position. His weapons were running low on energy, and even his superhuman endurance was beginning to show signs of strain. The moment came when she had to choose between her friend's life and stopping weapons that could kill millions of humans across the galaxy. Mechanical tendrils reached toward the data core where all of Jiwon's medical knowledge was being processed into tools for genocide, while enemy reinforcements moved to surround their position. She could save one person or save her species, but not both with the time and resources available. She made the choice that Jiwon's eyes had been begging her to make and turned her weapon toward the data processing center while her friend remained, trapped and helpless. The plasma rifle discharged its full power, setting into systems that exploded with brilliant light and heat that reached temperatures hot enough to vaporize metal and stone. The bioweapon project died in flames that lit up the jungle for kilometers in every direction. Kethvar appeared beside her as the explosion faded, carrying Jiwon's unconscious form in his arms. Somehow he had managed to cut her free during the seconds when enemy attention was focused on protecting their data systems from her attack. Her friend was alive and breathing, though still paralyzed from whatever the machines had done to her nervous system. But their victory was temporary, because the explosion had also sent signals that would bring Devourer reinforcements within hours. The scout ship had completed its mission of locating human settlements and gathering biological data, even though they had prevented the creation of species-specific weapons. Larger ships with greater numbers of war machines would arrive soon to begin the systematic consumption of everything on the planet. The sound of engines filled the air as Starwalker ships dropped through the atmosphere at speeds that should have torn them apart, but somehow left them intact and ready for combat. Kethvar had been broadcasting their battle to his commanders using equipment hidden in his gear, and the display of human courage and tactical skill had convinced them to commit forces to this system. Admiral Dong Hyun Choi's voice crackled through communication systems as human military ships also appeared in the sky above them. The rescue mission had been transformed into humanity's first joint military operation, with an alien species against enemies that threatened all biological life in the galaxy. Two fleets moved in coordination toward targets that had never faced united opposition from multiple species. The battle in space lasted only minutes as concentrated firepower from ships designed by different civilizations proved too much for Devourer technology to absorb and adapt to quickly enough. Mechanical plague ships that had seemed invincible when fighting single species found themselves overwhelmed by tactics and weapons they could not counter effectively. Hana watched from the forest floor as burning debris fell like metal rain around their position. Each piece of wreckage represented enemies that would never consume another world, or convert another species into mechanical components. The tide of war had not turned, but for the first time in centuries, biological life had won a decisive victory against the plague of consumption. Kethvar knelt beside her as they waited for rescue ships to land and spoke words in his own language before translating them for her understanding. She had earned the right to be called Battle Sister in the Starwalker tongue, and would be welcome among the warriors of his people for as long as she chose to fight against the darkness that threatened everything they valued. Human and alien. Medics worked together to treat Jiwan's injuries using techniques and medicines that neither species had possessed alone. The cooperation between different medical traditions produced results that saved lives and restored function to damaged neural pathways. Their friend would recover completely and carry knowledge of both healing approaches back to human space. Formal ceremonies took place aboard ships in orbit, where representatives of a dozen species gathered to witness humanity's acceptance into the galactic resistance. Hana stood beside Kethvar wearing the insignia of both human special forces and Starwalker battle honors, while Admiral Choi signed treaties that committed Earth to a war that might last for centuries. But she no longer thought of the conflict in terms of human versus alien interests. The week of testing and the final battle had taught her that courage and honor transcended species boundaries, while cowardice and cruelty looked the same regardless of what form they took. She had found brothers and sisters among the stars who measured worth through actions rather than appearance. The predator who had tracked her in silence had become her closest ally, in a war where survival depended on cooperation between species that had never imagined they could fight as one.